My name is Ted Ning. I am the Executive Director of LOHAS. For some of you who went to the social media conference or social media discussion earlier, you heard a little bit about LOHAS from Professor Macy. And I'm here really to talk, or really kind of moderate a really interesting discussion that we have today on transparency. And I wanted to just kind of go through that, what we're going to be talking about. Here we are. So this is really kind of the format that we're going to be trying to condense within this next hour. We're going to be talking about transparency in a variety of different ways. I'd like to have, first of all, a little bit of an opportunity for our different panelists to introduce themselves. Then we're going to go through some case studies on transparency in terms of theory, in terms of strategy, and in terms of direct-to-consumer. One of our panelists had to leave at the last minute, so we can't really cover the corporate culture aspect, but we'll have, that just allows for more time for the other ones. And in the format of what we're going to be trying to do is really have a case study of have you really look at what a desired goal is of a case study example, look at what the challenges are with that case study, break up into groups, discuss a little bit of what you think would be the ideal direction for that case study to go to, have you share that with us and everybody else, and then compare it with what really happened. So that's kind of the format that we're going to be going through. Make sense?
I didn't get my badge.
We clear? Okay, great. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So Tanya, why don't you go ahead and start and just do a quick introduction and tell me a little bit about what it is that you do and everybody else and what transparency really means to you.
Okay, so my name's Tanya Blackburn, and I'm the president of RTJ Consultants. We are a boutique public relations firm servicing a few different verticals, clean technology, finance, and hospitality. Today we're going to talk a little bit about theory, and in particular my theories and philosophies on transparency and communication. And we'll go through some of the triggers that, that we as consultants in this space aspire to when we're advising our clients.
Great, great. And that'll be really, really good. And Lisa, why don't you go ahead? We're going to just kind of do some real quick introductions.
Quick introductions first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Lisa Lilienthal, and I also am an independent consultant. I've been consulting for about 16 years, and my practice is centered around healthcare, the environment, and education primarily. And I am going to be talking today about the strategy that you might be thinking about when you're thinking about how to implement transparency in communications. And I'm going to use a little bit of a case study from one of my longtime clients, which is a company called Interface. You guys might be familiar with the carpet company Interface.
Yeah, and that'll be a really interesting case study there as well. Brenda.
I'm Brenda Springer, and I also am an independent consultant as well with Reveille Group. And we predominantly focus on consumer products and nonprofits. So today I'm going to be bringing to you a case study direct to youth consumers with my marquee client, which is Soul Technology. And they're the maker of 5 action sports brands. Their most popular is Etnies, and how we actually tackled the challenging youth market in the message of sustainability.
And the youth market is a quagmire, a Pandora's box for all of us, I think, for sure. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tanya. And Tanya's going to really kind of tee us up, got mics here, in terms of really kind of transparency, the definition of transparency, kind of get the juices, the creative juices flowing for us all. So Tanya, please take it away.
Thank you. So can you hear me okay? All right. So I'm going to run through real quick for you the overview of these slides. And unlike my fellow panelists, I have a teaser of a case study for you. And I'll get to that in a few decks. But basically, we're going to go through some theories of philosophy, theories and philosophies of transparent communication. And I'm going to pose them as questions to get you thinking. And I'm going to touch on an example of a brand that used their reputation to communicate negatively, and then contrastly, a brand that used their communication to communicate positively. And then we're going to intro this little case study teaser for you. We'll break out into some groups, And that's when I'll ask you to sort of complete the ending of this intro to the case study, so to be a little mysterious for you. Hi, I'm Tanya. If I can advance here. So is transparency a trend? Whoever says transparency is old-fashioned is just old. So we're going to discuss some triggers of transparency, and this speaks to sort of the philosophies of it. When you're talking about communicating with your brand or your organizations, you want to be consistent, you want to be honest, trustworthy, and your behaviors and your actions need to represent your brand. So when we talk about technology in this space, technology is helping drive transparency. It's doing that in a couple of different ways, and particularly with social media today. Companies are being held to a different standard now with the advent of Twitter as an example. And we're also seeing a big shift, in particular with women and men too, from the boardroom table to the kitchen table. And I can tell you, I worked on this presentation this morning from my kitchen table. So social networking, who is in control of your brand when you're on Twitter? Are there people tweeting for you, or is it just you? And if there are others tweeting for you, how careful are they being about communicating your brand with those triggers that we identified earlier? Companies that stretch, oh, how do I go back? Companies that stretch the truth are being called out even faster in today's society with the advent of social media. And one example of that, you're all familiar with earlier this year the fighting and strife that occurred in Egypt. And at the same time that was going on, Kenneth Cole, very popular brand, also had a collection launching at the same time. And so he took to Twitter and he said, "Millions are in an uproar. Rumor is that they heard our new spring collection is now available online. Millions are in uproar in Cairo." So I think we can see that this is an example of how Twitter was used to negatively represent a brand on Twitter. Spoke directly to his behavior and actions, the two triggers that we mentioned earlier. But I think it's okay to show your thorns. I think it's okay to have adversity and turn that into something positive. Sometimes organizations can thrive in adversity. And we have another example of that. We want you to be real with your constituents and your stakeholders and your shareholders. We want you to show your character. And being real, you know, oops, this is a sensitive little thing here, isn't it? So Coca-Cola faces some adversity. They're obviously the distributor and maker of Dasani products. So what's their adversity? Well, they probably are one of the largest distributors of plastic bottles. Not very well welcomed, right? But so how do they turn that into a positive in their communications? And I think they've done a really good job. They haven't overpromised. They're not saying they're going to change their products to 100% recyclable tomorrow. They're outlining a plan. And maybe it's better if I look this way because my eyes are horrible. It builds on our legacy of environmental ingenuity and sets the course for us to realize our vision to eventually introduce bottles made with materials that are 100% recyclable and renewable. So this is an example of messaging. It's crystal clear, it's transparent, and they're not overpromising something that they can't do for tomorrow. So they're holding true to their brand. So our case study today, sneak peek. My marquee client is Scientific Conservation, and recently Scientific Conservation acquired a company called Cervidyne. And Cervidyne, I don't know if any of you are familiar with these two companies. Scientific Conservation is a technology provider of energy efficiency. Cervidyne is a services provider of energy efficiency. So we were charged with, how do we bring these two companies together under one roof? So the first thing we decided to do, through diligence, is find out who they are and how are we going to communicate it. And our timeline is very quick. We're right in the middle of this merger. So we decided, let's interview some of the key stakeholders in both organizations as a starting point. So for instance, scientific conservation, we decided that the culture in that company was fast. They're technology driven, they're in the Silicon Valley, they're fast. Cervidine, they're considerate, they're considered, they're more slow paced and thoughtful. Scientific conservation's dynamic, Cervidine disciplined. Optimistic, realistic. Micro, should be macro, macro, micro, high tech and high touch. So we sat back and thought, wow, we've got two sort of disparate companies coming under one roof in 30 days. What are we going to do? Well, we've got the youthful look of the Aston Martin. This is super sensitive, Ted. And the distinguished historical Bentley. Those are our two companies coming together under one roof. So how do we, as consultants on this project, put the word merge back into a merger? And I'm going to share with you a little bit of the outcome. But when we break into groups, I want you to be thinking about what your outcome might be, because I can't give the whole secret away. The company is launching, the new company is launching next week. So together we've decided the new company name is going to be Sky Energy. So we're pronouncing it Sky Energy. And we've decided that they are both grounded and groundbreaking. And where they intersect, and this is the secret that I'm kind of letting out of the bag and teasing for you before the launch next week, is in mining the fifth fuel. And so when we talk about the fifth fuel, we're talking about energy efficiency. And Sky Energy is going to be making some impactful inroads in this space in the coming weeks and years, literally. So I could tell you more, but you'll have to wait. And you can find out more by following Sky Energy on Twitter, @SkyEnergy. And again, that launches on the 8th. And it's a can't-miss event. I'm sorry that John's left the room. He's actually playing a critical role in that launch. So brand integrity, in summary, through transparent communication is really the new business advantage. You really have to be transparent in your communication. You have to define what those triggers are for your organizations. So it comes down to common sense and treat those as you wish to be treated. So to break out into our groups to discuss, I'm going to put up a slide here. Maybe if I point it, it's better. So we want you to discuss your theories and philosophies on what you would do in bringing two disparate companies together under one roof. And so the triggers that we mentioned earlier: consistency, honesty, trust, behavior, and your actions. So I want you to be thinking about some other triggers that would help in communications. Maybe that's the frequency of your communication. Would you communicate often? Would you communicate only from a position of strength, as an example, versus just every single new thing that happened in your company? Are you going to go to market with it? Are you going to go to press with it? Or are you going to noodle on it a little bit and package it from a position of strength and make it more impactful so that you don't dilute the message that you're ultimately trying to deliver? So Ted, maybe if you could.
Yeah, so if we could have everybody on their tables kind of just talk about what is transparency, really what is your definition of transparency when it comes to these components here. We just break up in 5 minutes and really just kind of extrapolate amongst yourselves and kind of talk about what you feel those are. There's no wrong answer with
There
this.
is no wrong answer.
So if you could just take a minute to just kind of introduce yourselves if you don't know each other. What does transparency mean based on these parameters? Really quick, what were some of the things that you just discussed on transparency?
Yeah, we said communication was missing from that list.
Communication was missing from the list?
Yeah.
Okay, good point. Anything else?
And these are things you demonstrate over time, but
These
it
are-
takes time.
So, good point, yeah. So these are things you demonstrate over time, but it takes time to do these. Great. What else? What else? How about over here? What are some other things that you talked about?
So we're mainly talking about we were talking about the communication, and we kind of sideline into whether a company wanted to be transparent or not. Like, let's start off that base. How transparent do you want to be? Right. And then which one of those points you would focus on, whether it be communication actions or internally what your internal transparency would be, and then how to formulate it. So we focus on the communication, really. That's where our conversation was at.
Yeah. Again, that was something that the other table brought up in terms of communication is very important. Yes?
I was focusing on the issue honesty, and I think it may be oversimplistic to think that there are that many clients or customers or groups that want to be totally honest and then communicate transparently. So I'm raising that question: how realistic is that item?
Yeah, good points. Good points. Let's take it. How about this table in the back? Let's go over here. What did you guys talk about?
The example that I have is I connected transparency with honesty from the perspective of business excellence. So the idea that you can't really move your company forward, meet your goals, keep your clients happy unless you're transparent about your successes but also your challenges.
Yep.
And if you're always just want to talk about how good you're doing or how good your team is doing and not really posing what issues are looming, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm. Right, and what Tanya was talking about too, in terms of showing both the rose and the thorns, you need to have them both. Excellent, excellent. One more?
The only other thing that I was adding to that was something that we use at my company, Toyota, is pulling the andon cord. So you have that permission to stop, and you don't get into trouble, like you're saying, bringing up the problems.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
Okay.
Tanya, do you have anything you want to talk about in terms of kind of what people have said?
Yeah, no, I think all fantastic points, and even earlier when I sat down at this table here, and one of the topics was internal communication when you're going through a merger, and I think that when you talk about integration plans for companies when they're going through mergers, similar to what Scientific Conservation and Servodyne are going through, it's very important that we stay away from the us versus them dialogue when we're trying to come together under one roof. And so I think that the feedback here has been on point. Excellent.
Excellent. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next one up here is Lisa. Lisa's going to be talking about the strategy aspects in terms of transparency, and has some unique case studies as well.
That's all right. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I told you in my introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about just a little piece of the conversation that happens at Interface Incorporated, which is is everybody pretty familiar with Interface? I think reputationally speaking, they are pretty much understood by people as being a big commercial carpet company. They're a $1 billion company. They're based in Atlanta, and they have been on their sustainability journey for about 17 years, so longer than most, and have, in some ways, it can be a double-edged sword, because in some ways they've been doing this for so long that they've had the luxury of time and introspection, and a lot of have had the chance to give a lot of consideration to a lot of issues around transparency. On the other hand, because they are reputationally speaking a leader, and from a thought leader perspective very much out in front, then that could potentially make them the target as well. And so it's not something, I say that to say that it's not something that I think is taken lightly by the company. And one thing that, what I want to talk about is kind of the idea of transparency. There's a couple of what I consider to be radical ideas floating around at Interface right now. One of them is that reporting just for reporting's sake, so any kind of sustainability reporting, is just a bad idea. It's a waste of resources, and it doesn't really provide any value to our products, to our customers, to our investors, that sort of thing. So there's a real conversation going on there about, so what is important? We have all these lots and lots of metrics, and we definitely have a commitment to sharing, but we want to figure out what the boundaries of that are that make sense for our business, that make sense for our investors, that make sense for our customers. So that's the big conversation. One of the conversations, and this is a company that published its first sustainability report in 1997. It was a really big idea at the time to publish a sustainability report, and they put some really ambitious and audacious goals in it, and most of them have been met or in the process of being met, but they've led over the years to a more of an online presence for sustainability reporting, some quarterly and real-time reporting when it's available. And there was a conversation that was beginning to emerge at Interface about third-party certification or validation for their product claims. And I'm sure all of you have seen the many different sticklers and labels and sort of certifying protocols out there. And it can get really confusing, both for the company and for the consumer. And so there's a very considered conversation going on about what we want to do this, but what makes sense. The company has always been committed to life cycle analysis. I'm going to give you the strategy, the challenges now. So while the company has really bold environmental goals, the progress was only was not really generally understood by customers. They understood that they were a really progressive company, but no customer was saying, well, I really want to understand where this 65% greenhouse gas emission reduction came from. The big goals were not really as important to the customer as the specific impacts related to the product that they were considering. So while the company was using life cycle analysis to evaluate the impacts of its products, it was using it more to guide their decision making than it was to communicate that. So the question became, what kind of system do we want to use to explain to our customers what the specific impacts of our very specific products are? So what the thing, I guess I want to give you a little bit of the conversation, and then you guys can have a discussion. So the end I won't talk about the entire end result, but what under consideration was environmental product declarations. And if you're not familiar with what they are, they're really just like a nutrition label on something that you would buy at the grocery store. And it gives the impacts of every process and material that's involved in making that product, so that you as a consumer can decide what's important to you and get just the facts. There's no ranking, there's no this is the best and most sustainable product or this is the least. It's just simply fact-based. So if you're a calorie counter, you're going to look at calories. If you're a carb counter, you're going to look at carbs. If you're a sugar counter, you're going to look at sugar. Customers who are specifying carpet have different motivations. And so the fact-based environmental product declaration gives you a chance to look at what's inside that particular product that you're specifying, understanding that it's coming from a responsible company who's providing this data. So I guess that was the challenge, the question at Interface is, should we do this? Should we put together, put us in a position where a customer can compare product A and product B that we offer, but potentially down the road can also put us in a position of the customer being able to very easily compare product A from our competitor and product A from us. So that was the challenge that the company was having, and then I'll tell you a little bit of the outcome after you have your discussion.
So let's talk about the discussion. Can we just kind of paraphrase that in terms of what are the objectives for people to discuss?
So the question is really, is transparency in the form of an environmental product declaration, a nutrition label, if you will, for a product a desirable thing to do? Would it provide value? And would it more closely align who we are as a company and the products that we produce or offer to the marketplace?
Based off of the case that you had, which Interface actually did this, right?
Yes.
So they did this. So once again, one more time, paraphrase.
So the challenge at Interface
just to make sure.
Well,
was everyone okay with it?
Well, so the challenge at Interface was to say, are our big, bold environmental goals getting understood by the customer at the product level? Probably not. So if they're not, then would we create more strategic alignment in using transparency, or would we be deploying transparency in a different and better way if we chose to provide environmental product declarations, EPDs, for each of our products?
So if you could just kind of, in your groups, kind of discuss, does transparency help in this matter of EPDs? And what, if you were to interface, what would you do in this instance? So if you're interface, what would you do if you had the challenges, if you had environmental goals, these challenges ahead of you in rolling out a food label orientation for a final product?
So to EPD or not to EPD? That is the question. Thank you, Tanya, for that.
Christine, you want to talk here?
Yes, they should do an EPD. Even if it's not the first thing that consumers look at, they're always going to look at profit, longevity, capital assets, things like that. It could be the second or third thing, and it's a differentiator. If you're the first person to do it, nobody's going to say, oh, your EPD says you do 60% post-consumer content. This person does 65. The other person's not doing it. So it's a differentiator.
Good. So you think that they should do it. So it's important for them to do it. How about this group?
We think labels are a must. Although we had differing opinions, actually. We thought we should do it. I thought, like food labels, we would just get used to seeing them, scanning them, picking up the pertinent information. But we had differing opinions here. Go ahead.
Well, like Bev says, there's information and there's earnestness, but you shouldn't put too much earnestness or we'll all fall asleep and cry. So really should try to entertain a little bit when you're educating. And don't forget the punchline. What is the bottom line? What is this doing for me, my baby, and the planet?
Well said.
Good, good. Excellent. How about in the back? Anyone, any other comments? Anyone want to take the mic before I throw it at somebody first? Yeah?
One of our thoughts was that you have to be very careful how you design it, because sometimes there can be a lot of information, but if people don't really understand it or it doesn't relate, so design is key as well.
Okay, great. Design, must have the information, and important to not forget the punchline. Anyone else?
Well, we had that question.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
About the EPD.
Is there a standard to be followed? Like on Monroney labels for vehicles, they have to show, or they have the star rating, the whatever?
Yes, there is a standard. There are
Okay.
very few companies who are currently doing EPDs, but they are based on a standardized assessment, and they're based on 2 different ISO programs. But there is a standard, and that's sort of the selling point of an EPD or an environmental product declaration, is that it is standardized.
Great. So we've got the people who think that it should be done. The design needs to be an important factor. It also needs to be all-inclusive. It is standardized. Unveil, please, what really happened?
Okay, so let me say that this is very much an evolving conversation, and I think it should be. And the outcome is alignment. Interface has not just committed to do EPDs, but in interface fashion has put it out there that they'll have EPDs for all new products by 2012. It's a huge undertaking. I know EPDs are just a new consideration for you guys, but if you look into it, you'll see it's a pretty extensive undertaking. So the end result is that customers will be able to compare all products according to environmental impacts, initially probably just at interface. There are a couple of other companies, Barilla Pasta and Nikon, that are also doing EPDs on their very different product lines, but they're, so there's an education component that is inherent in doing this endeavor, and it's an internal and an external education component. So you have to educate your product designers about the process, and you also have to educate your customers about why you're doing it, why it's important. And in making the announcement in November, Interface also challenged their industry and their competitors to adopt EPDs too, so that clear comparisons between similar products could be made. They told me if I held it up high. So this is just one of the communications. This is actually from Interface Europe, and it's the Let's Be Clear campaign. So this is sort of the beginning of their effort to educate consumers about EPD. So I just wanted to share that with you because it is something pretty. And to your point, it has to be designed really well. You have to teach people what to expect. Just like they've redesigned the food pyramid on us this year, you know, it's sort of it's a similar education campaign is to not convince, but to encourage people to look a little more deeply than the claims that are made in marketing materials and ask for fact-based analysis.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Excellent.
guys.
So, yeah.
No, I think you're up there.
I have a question for you. One, you mentioned something about reporting and how you were looking at this as potentially an alternative to reporting, or is that what you meant? Or you were talking about how reporting, you weren't sure where that was going, if it was valuable, that sort of thing. So could you talk just a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm sorry, I should have closed the loop on that discussion. So it's sort of a similar conversation is to say, well, if we're going to think about reporting differently, but we still have a very much a commitment to maintaining our reputation for transparency and our commitment to transparency, then what does that look like? We do life cycle analysis, and we do that very openly, and we'll provide a spider graph on any product, but that's a really complicated piece of information. It doesn't really tell you where that product ranks relative to others. It doesn't give you the right information to tell you where that product ranks. So environmental product declarations are being looked at as a more, it's just a more relevant form of transparency to the customer. So while the customer may care about our big environmental goals and they may pay attention to those once or twice a year, what's really relevant to them are the impacts of that very specific product that they are considering specifying. So I think the conversation about reporting is evolving as well. Interface does maintain all of its ecometrics data on the global website, and that's not going away anytime soon. But the company doesn't do GRI reporting, and they don't do any of those other really, really time and labor intensive reports because they haven't been able to demonstrate the value to the company or to the customer. And Interface is famous for saying, a lot of folks at Interface are saying, Ray Anderson was the first one to say that if it doesn't provide value to the customer, then it's not something we should be doing. So that's the line of thought there.
Yeah, and just being a trend follower in LOHAS, I see that this is kind of a movement kind of going to this format in terms of, instead of the large, thick reports that not many people, if any, really read. They just tend to be on a bookshelf for a while. Thank you very much, Lisa. That was really interesting.
Thank you, guys.
So next, Brenda. Brenda's going to talk a little bit about Soul Technology.
Okay, great. So Soul Technology was founded by a former world champion skateboarder, 5-time world champion skateboarder, who pioneered a brand called Etnies, which was the first action sports or skateboarding company which made footwear for skateboarders by skateboarders, which was a big deal back in the 80s. And so in many ways, he's been looked at as a pioneer in that industry, really groundbreaking, took on the big guys of Vans and Nike, who kind of really dominated that industry. And he, because of his place of authenticity, he was able to build a pretty big empire for skate footwear and launch the industry. And now today, you guys see X Games. If you have kids in your teenage years, they all wear the skate shoes, and it's cool to be a skater. And so Etnies, their biggest brand is Etnies, and they have surf, snow, snowboarding, BMX, motocross, and rally car racing. So it's all that heavy action-oriented thing, and they really look at the planet as their playground. And about 10 years ago, Bier looked at the success that he's had and had kind of an epiphany moment of wanting to make a difference for the planet with his company. And how does he tackle that with footwear? And so he started his journey about 10 years ago, and we don't consider ourselves a green company. We consider ourselves an environmentally driven company because it's really hard to do. It's really hard to go after. But he dove in, and he has accomplished quite a bit, and the company is set to be carbon neutral by 2020. So we're on a pretty good track for it. That being said, on the consumer side, so he's very strong in his corporate communication. The company's really embraced it. But on the consumer side, with celebrating their 25-year anniversary this year, they wanted to really focus on the future and not the past. And how they felt that they could focus on the future and what the next 25 years would hold is by looking at key elements of their past DNA, and one of that was sustainability. And so the goal of the Next 25 campaign was to just bring a deeper awareness and a deeper connection to consumers about what they're doing on the environment. Now the challenge, let's see, if this works for me.
Yay! Yay!
The challenge is that in previous years, Etni's research and retailer feedback have shown that youth consumers, and we're talking like about 3 to 5 years ago, youth consumers really didn't care too much about whether or not you're a sustainable company or that your product had a sustainable component. And so they had launched a collection that was sustainably minded, and it didn't perform well. And so taking that investment and taking that hit on that investment, and then also realizing all the marketing and consumer awareness programs really didn't have a lot of impact, they were a little hesitant about launching a 25-year anniversary campaign around a sustainable initiative. And so we had to kind of go through a bunch of different hoops to try to figure out, hey, how do we do this? Because really, truly, the environment is the future. It is truly part of the brand DNA. We do need the planet as our playground. And Pierre, as a visionary for the skate market and for the action sports industry, just felt it was the right thing to do. And what we found is that youth consumer consciousness has evolved quite a bit in the last 3 years. And specifically, I would say in the last 2 years, we've seen a huge amount of awareness, especially in the 17 to 20-year-old range. And so that was our biggest challenge. And so my question to you is, how do you think we launched a campaign to consumers?
Using transparency, and how do you launch your new campaign, your 25-year history, or your 25-year anniversary, to the new youth market that's been more updated in terms of eco-awareness?
Yes.
I'm just paraphrasing. How do you go about doing that, using kind of the thoughts in terms of what we have been discussing in regards to transparency?
Predominantly, Etni's and Soul Technologies' key consumer base are core enthusiasts. They're people who really are passionate about the sport that they enjoy. So those are sold at core shops, like core retailers. So that is probably why 5 years ago they had such a challenge, is because those consumers just wanted a very skate-oriented product, and they didn't care about any other message. But the retail distribution has expanded into the Zoomies, the PacSuns, the Zappos of the world. So Etni's is available on a larger mainstream account base.
Interesting question. Interesting challenge.
Well, we're kind of flummoxed by this one, I guess we'd say, because it sounds like none of us really know anything about the market or the brand, which makes it a little tough. But
I bet you know some youth.
Yeah, I used to be a kid. So we were talking about the challenge being that kids, particularly in this market, we would think are really into shoes and the style of the shoe, and that you have to have a hip and cool thing. And is an eco element hip and cool? I don't know. So I would think it's a challenge to insert another sort of branding message into something that's very style oriented. But now that you have this sort of broader audience, maybe it helps you attract some additional people that wouldn't normally think about this shoe because they're not really skaters and that kind of thing. They don't really know about the brand, but hey, it's eco-friendly. But yet you can't turn off your core audience. Right. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking that it's subtle and it's you insert sort of undertones without saying it's green. That it's more, some of the language that you use sort of points to that without screaming it is kind of where I mentally landed. But it seems like a challenge, I think.
Yep. That's why it's a pretty big interesting question. And those are very dynamic pieces of the market, the product you need to know. Anyone else in the back?
One of the things that I have a 19-year-old, and she's not a skateboarder, but I teach sustainability, so we have these conversations from time to time about this. And one of the things that I know about that group is that they don't get why we would promote something as sustainable. Because they've grown up with sustainability, they've been educated with this throughout high school, and so they've been taught about this. Luckily, our educational system has been teaching them about this for some time, and they have these sensibilities. If you tell them that a company is not green, they could be angry at that company and maybe reject their products. But to actually promote something as green, it seems a disconnect for them. And I can't speak to it, but I do think that there's something in that we have to be very, very aware of and understand better as we promote to that generation. Definitely. Because they just don't see promoting something as green as necessarily a differentiator. They assume it should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're sustainability natives.
Yeah, they've already been there. They kind of grew up with it, whereas we were kind of trying to change ourselves
And if you
into
promote
it.
it, you're disingenuous.
Yeah.
At our table, we were talking about the relationship that skaters have with the built environment and how it's similar to how surfers have a natural connection with waves and water in the ocean. So that, like that table over there was saying, you wouldn't want to, there's a danger of watering down your message now that you have a broader retail scope and you're selling to more people. So you wouldn't want to brand it as green, we agree. But that it might be cool to take on an issue that they're already really connected to. Maybe re-urbanization, build a skate park in like a failed public space in downtown, maybe and connect it to transit or parks or clean air or something like that.
Yeah. Good ideas. Any last one? Anyone else? Last chance. I mean, right? Yeah? Uh-oh.
Do you want some humor? Because
Sure.
one of the things that when she was just talking right now about what she just said, if you want to take this to a mass audience and everyone's thinking about cleaning transportation and global warming and new cars that are coming on the market that are fuel efficient, call that your zero emission vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. We actually call that around our company.
Yeah. So Brenda, what really happened?
So all of your thoughts are actually right on. We've had these intense discussions for over a year and a half trying to build this campaign. And we just decided to go back to the company roots, and that was authenticity. And Pierre was successful with authenticity as a skateboarder, and as an environmentalist for the last 10 years, he has been authentic in representing that vision. And so we just decided to come from that place and say, you know, we are skateboarders. We need clean air to skate. We need clean water to surf. We need snow to snowboard. And so this is why we do what we do. And the fact is, we haven't really been telling that message to you, but we've been doing it for the last 10 years without talking to you about it. So it's time to connect our youth to a bigger cause. And so we launched Buy a Shoe, Plant a Tree campaign. And we connected youth not to necessarily the sustainable product element. Really quick, just to show you that actually, that's our 6 steps to sustainability, but that's featuring the shoe. We didn't really go into a lot of the product detail as much to consumers. That shoe is made of recycled rubber tires, which come from BMX tires. And connects to our BMX story, as well as recycled plastic bottles and some other materialization. But we didn't focus as much on the product components, but we connected them to the cause of Buy a Shoe, Plant a Tree. And we actually launched this campaign, and we're building a rainforest in Costa Rica with the Maleku Indians, which is the smallest indigenous tribe in Costa Rica that lost their land in the late 1800s. To a rubber tree war and cattle farming, and they were massacred. And there's only 450 of them left. And ironically, it's the area that they're inhabiting right now is United Nations sanctioned land, and it is all for the purpose of reforestation. And it happens to be the United Nations Year of the Forest. And so it was a great connection to get kids behind a cause, not necessarily behind a product, even though it is very product-oriented with Buy a Shoe, Plant a Tree. We also tapped into this ethonomics trend right now with, you know, you have Tom's shoes, which is buy one, get one, or buy one, give one.
Give one.
Yeah, so it's very similar, but youth really respond to that. They just want to know it's one for one. And so we just said one shoe, one tree, we got it. So we launched in March this year, and we brought, one of the key components too is our top athletes. They're world class, and we just decided to take our skate team and our surf team down to Costa Rica. There's only one of those guys that is really involved in the environment. He's from Hawaii, and he's super aggro and awesome about it. But Ryan Sheckler, who's a really big name, and a bunch of other surfers and skaters came down, and they really are not involved in the environment. And so what we did is we decided to take consumers on a transparency journey of their journey, discovering the importance of the environment and bringing them to the rainforest, where we're going to break ground with the Maleco Indians, learning about their culture and showcasing consumers directly with their idols and how they've changed in their discovery process of the environment. So it was pretty successful. I mean, we just launched, and we're actually not just doing it for the anniversary. We're going to be doing it for years to come. We have over, I think we've already received a quarter of a billion in audience impressions, over 300 articles worldwide on the campaign, and it's just growing. And we originally committed to 35,000 trees this year, which if you look at our overall size of a company, which is almost 200 million, 35,000 shoes is not that much, but it was a new lifestyle silhouette to a new consumer. So it's pretty good. And Pierre, Andre was just up talking the other day, and he made a comment about the fact that we're nearing 50,000. And so that's really great. We ran out of land in Costa Rica. So next year when we launch the campaign again, we're going to be targeting Brazil. And it's just growing. It's the beginning of something really amazing. And when Pierre presented the campaign at a conference this past March, some of the action sports companies came up and just said, hey, we're just really glad that you guys are no longer green muting. And I'd never heard that phrase before, but green muting, because we weren't really talking to consumers. And they're just happy that we're talking now. And I think the time is right.
Right.
So.
Excellent. No more on the mute button in terms of being quiet about what they were doing. Now they're actually talking about it, because the audience, the consumer audience, is caught up to their initiatives. So now they're meeting people where they're at, and they're ready for it, and they're doing it in this way that really integrates the external aspects, as was noted before, and not necessarily the product. So. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Thank you very much to the panelists for offering these really interesting case studies. I hope you're able to kind of get some mind-bending out of this, and thanks again.